Okay, hello everyone. For today's lecture, we have oligopoly. So far, we discussed monopoly and perfect competition, right? And also, we discussed both cases. I mean, monopoly and perfect competition. They are both located in two different extremes, right, of market structure. That means you may not be able to find that much examples of either cases, right, in the real world. But somewhere in between, I mean, between monopoly and perfect competition, you can find so many examples in the real world. It's going to be close to real world market structure. And these are examples are called oligopoly, right? So oligopoly is another form of market structure which is located between monopoly and perfect competition, right? So today we are going to review oligopoly and we are going to see how oligopoly is different from monopoly and perfect competition, how the manager of like a firm in oligopoly market would decide about quantity and price that maximizes the profit, to what extent the manager has flexibility to determine the price and quantity. And then we are going to see the number of firms, the number of competitors, and their like market power for each competitor in such a market. And then we are going to see how the manager. What we are going to actually discuss is that the manager of a firm in oligopoly market would try to anticipate the range of actions for the other competitors, right? And then they would determine the price and quantity accordingly, right? So this is how oligopoly would be different from the other types of market structure. It's like how the manager reacts to the other firm's action. So for today, first we are going to have a quick review on five forces model, which tries to determine how a market would be oligopoly based on different dimensions of a market. Then we are going to review concentration ratio and concentration index that determines to what extent a market would be concentrated, to what extent the market is monopoly, oligopoly, or perfect competition. And then we are going to see how the market concentration would be related to the price. And lastly, we are going to have a review on important oligopoly theories, trying to explain firms' behavior under oligopoly. It's going to be Carnot, Bertrand, Bertrand with capacity constraint, Bertrand with differentiation, and then the last one, which is Stackelberg. So these are different models of oligopoly. First of all, how oligopoly or the other market structures would be distinguished from each other, right? There are five dimensions that makes market structure different from each other. The first one is internal rivalry. To what extent the firms in a market, in an industry, can compete with each other, right? So that's the first dimension that determines a market structure. For example, in perfect competition, internal rivalry is at the maximum level, but in monopoly, it's zero. There is no rival, right? And for oligopoly, it's somewhere in between. The next one is market entry. How much or to what extent the firms, outside firms, are free to enter a market if they feel that there would be opportunity for them, right? For example, in perfect competition, there is no restriction and they can freely enter the market, but in monopoly, there's a complete restriction and they cannot enter the market. For oligopoly, for sure, there is no restriction, but there's no legal barrier, or there is no complete block for outside firms to enter, but there are some, let's say, some forces that prevent them to enter. For example, in the case of Boeing and Airbus, they are they are plain construction companies, right? So for these companies, no one is restricted to enter, right? But because the investment, they need a great deal of initial investment, that's some sort of restriction for the other firms to enter, right? And then the other the other dimension that could determine a market is substitutes and complements. What are the substitutes good? What are the complement market? How they are, or what's the market structure in the substitute markets or substitute industries? What's the market structure in complement industries? That would determine a market to be perfect competition, monopoly, or oligopoly. For example, in the case of trucking and railways, these are two different industries, but they are substituted with each other, right? So what's happening, or what's the market structure in trucking, that would impact the market structure in railways, right? This is also the case for complements. What is the market structure for the complement product of an industry, right? That would impact the market structure of a good. And the next one is supplier power and buyer's power. To what extent they have negotiation power, right? To what extent they have power to impact the price and quantity, right? So that's another factor that could determine the market power. Now, let's see how we can call a market. I mean, how we can definitely call, or let's say how we can define a market to be a oligopoly. If you remember, we discussed that depending on the type of the industry, depending on the type of the firm, one market with 10 participants, with 10 firms, could be called perfect competition, but the exact 10 firms in another industry may be called oligopoly, right? So if you're going to compare across different industries, we need to come up with a unified index, right? That could be used across different industries to determine the type of the market structure. That index could be concentration ratio, right? So by concentration ratio, we are trying to define to what extent the market share is with the top firms of the market, right? For example, the famous concentration ratio is CR4, which is telling us to what extent the market share goes with the top 4% of the firms in the industry, right? For example, look at the table. For laundry machine, top 4 firms, they have 100% of the market. How about the top eight firms? They have also 100% of the market, right? Or let's see another one. For example, warehouse club. Top 4 firms, they have 94%. Top 8 firms, they have 95%. So this shows the majority of the market is with the top 4 firms, right? So this actually shows, for example, for the first two, this shows the majority or the entire market is concentrated for a few firms, right? So that means the market is very concentrated. That means the market structure is very close to monopoly, right? But if the market share is very, very well or better than this distributed across firms, that means the market structure is closer to perfect competition. For example, look at this one, lawn equipment. The top four firms, they have 75% of the market share, and that means compared to the laundry machine, they have less than the market share. That means compared to laundry machine, this industry is closer to perfect competition, right? So concentration ratio tells us to what extent a market is concentrated, regardless of the number of the size of the industry or the size of the market, right? Now, let's see how we can define, based on this ratio, how we can call a market oligopoly. This is just a rule which is accepted by everyone. We usually say if CR4, the concentrated ratio, is below 40%, we usually call that market to be perfect competition, right? So when CR4 is below 40%, that means top 4 firms in the market, they have less than 40% of the market share, right? So this is kind of telling us that the rest, the rest of the firms, they have 60% of the market share. It's kind of telling us that the market is very well distributed across firms, right? So that means the market is less concentrated, and that means the market is closer to perfect competition. If the CR4 ratio is somewhere between 40% and 60%, we usually call that market to be oligopoly, right? It could be tight oligopoly or loose oligopoly, but it's oligopoly, right? For tight oligopoly, it's going to be more than 60%, but for the loose oligopoly, it's going to be somewhere between 40% and 60%. How about the monopoly? For the monopoly, we need to come up with CR1, which is telling us what is the market share for the top firm in the industry, right? If CR1 is greater than 90%, that means that we call that market or industry to be a monopoly. If you're gonna use this concentrated ratio in the real world to see, for example, how or to what extent the U.S. market is monopoly, oligopoly, or perfect competition, we would say that the numbers tell us that about 3/4 of total dollar value of goods and services produced in the U.S., they are competitive market, right? So it's kind of majority of goods and services in the U.S. economy, they are a perfect competition, right? The examples could be agriculture, industries, forestry, fisheries, mining, and wholesale and retail trades, right? They are mainly perfect competition. How about the monopoly? About the monopoly, 10% of US GDP, they are loose monopoly, and they're tight monopoly, and 12% of GDP, US GDP, they are loose monopoly, right? These are oligopoly, right? 10% are 10% of US GDP, they are oligopoly, and just very, very small percentage of GDP is produced under monopoly, right? So we would say that that means that these numbers are telling us that the US economy is kind of less concentrated, right? Because the majority of the US GDP is produced under perfect competition and then oligopoly, and very, very small share of GDP is produced under monopoly. Now, let's review different theories under, I think I missed one slide here. Let me make sure we are also covering one. Yeah, let me go to the whiteboard. Okay, so how this concentration ratio is related to the price, right? So if you remember under elasticity concept, we discussed that the markup is related like negatively to the elasticity, right? So this was kind of the formula: price minus marginal cost over price, which is the markup. That was 1 over elasticity, right? So elasticity, if we call it that way, the elasticity is located in the denominator, right? So that formula is useful as long as the market concentration doesn't matter, right? Or let's say we are talking about a like perfect competition market, right? But if market concentration matters, it means we are talking about oligopoly or monopoly, then market concentration also plays a role here, right? It will be here, right? So capital H is representing the degree of market concentration. If the market is very concentrated, like the monopoly or a tight oligopoly, then a capital H market concentration is going to be high. If the market is less concentrated, like perfect competition, capital H is going to be low, right? So what this is telling us is that if the market is very well concentrated, like the monopoly or oligopoly, right, then market concentration is going to be high, and then that means the producer markup, it's going to be also high, right? If you remember, under the case of monopoly, we discussed that the monopolist, which is the only firm in the market, is able to maximize the profit, right? Is able to restrict the output, raise the price to maximize the profit, right? So under monopoly, concentration is very high, and that would cause a great deal of or let's say the maximum profit for the monopolist, right? So that means the markup is going to be high for the monopolist as long as concentration ratio is high, right? But under perfect competition, we discussed that first of all, the concentration ratio is very low. And we also discussed that under perfect competition, each firm has zero market power and they have no impact on the price, right? And that would cause, and since we have free entry, that would cause each firm under perfect competition to experience zero economic profit, right? So that is the markup. It's going to be very low for perfect competition, right? So if we have perfect competition, concentration ratio is going to be low, and that would cause zero economic profit and very low markup for, or zero markup for the firm under perfect competition, right? So that means as concentration ratio goes high, right? That means the market is closer to monopoly and tight oligopoly. So this in the denominator, it's going to be high, and that would cause the markup to be high, right? So you can see that each firm markup is very well related to the concentration ratio, right? So this is how the price and the markup are related to the they are related to degree of concentration of a market. Okay, perfect. Now let's have a quick review on famous oligopoly theories, right? What are the famous oligopoly theories and how they can determine and define the behavior of each firm under oligopoly. We have three famous model theories explaining oligopoly. The first one is Carnot model, the second one is Bertrand, and the last one is Stackelberg. Under Carnot model, for example, we have two firms, right? And each firm is deciding or making the decision simultaneously compared to the other firm, and they are deciding about how much to produce, right? So the let's say the control variable or the variable they can control under Carnot oligopoly, it's the quantity, how much to produce, right? By the way, they both are producing homogeneous goods, right? They are producing the exact same goods. The second model is Bertrand, and under Bertrand model, the control variable or the variable they can make a decision on, it's the price, right? So they can decide at what price they want to sell the good or the product. And under Stackelberg, they have sequential movements, right? One firm decides first, and then the other firm, after just observing the first firm decision, they would go for the decision, right? So the difference between Stackelberg and Bertrand and Carnot is that under Carnot and Bertrand, both firms are deciding at the same time, but under Stackelberg, it's happening sequentially. One firm decides first, and then the other firm. Now, let's see how Carnot, because in both cases, they are both producing the exact same product, both firms, and then they are also deciding and moving at the same time, right, simultaneously. Then how Bertrand is different from Carnot model, right? Under Carnot model, two firms are deciding on how much to produce, right? So this is a case when the firm has a commitment on quantity. If they had a commitment on quantity, they prefer to make the decision as soon as they can, right? The examples of such a firm, it can be, for example, for capital intensive industries like oil refining or aluminum smelting, right? Or cement, right? So for these type of industries, the producer, the firm needs a great deal of initial investment since they want to for example, they need to decide about the size or the size of the manufacturing or the size of the investment and capital they are going to make at the beginning, right? They need to decide how much they want to produce first, right? And it's kind of, if it's not completely impossible, it's very hard to change in the future, right? So that's why it's important for them to make a decision about the quantity they want to produce, and then make a decision about the capital and investment accordingly at the very beginning, right? And then under Carnot model, when they are making decision about the price, then about the quantity, then the price could be adjusted accordingly, right? And then under Bertrand model, it's the case when the firm needs to make commitments about the price. For example, they're going to publish catalogs and they need to mention the price in the catalog and they cannot change it later. So that means it's important for them to determine the price first, and then the quantity would be adjusted according to the price, right? The examples of these firms, such a firm, it could be software industries or insurance, banking, telecommunication, right? For example, when we are receiving brochure or other advertisement from cable companies, home internet companies at our mailbox, it's kind of they are committed to that price, right? And they cannot change it later. And as we receive that advertisement and we claim for this price, they have to provide us the price, right? So that means it's important for them to determine the price at the very beginning, to decide about the price, and then they can adjust the quantity based on the price later. They have more flexibility on the quantity, right? Now, let's have a more detailed review on each model. Let's start with Carnot and Carnot duopoly when we have two firms under Carnot competition, right? To see what would be the Carnot equilibrium and what would be the Carnot model, we have to make a few assumptions. The first one is that both firms under Carnot competition, they have identical cost function, right? So that means the type of fixed or the size of fixed cost, if there is any, as well as the format of the variable cost function. This is the same for both firms, right? And they are also producing the exact same product. The second assumption is that each firm knows the shape of the market demand, so they know exactly what does market demand look like, and they can determine the price based on different levels of total industry output. So that means both firms, they know perfectly the market demand as well as market supply. And then the last assumption is that both firms, they are deciding, or let's say they are moving simultaneously without knowing the exact decision of the other firms, right? So they don't know what would be the decision of the other firm, but what they know is that the other firm would make its best decision, right? The other firm's decision given, right? So what they can do is that they can determine, or let's say they can make their best response, right, for different levels or different or the range of options of the other firm. We are going to see it in more details in a few minutes. So to summarize the assumption, first of all, we have homogeneous products under Carnot duopoly. We also discussed that the market demand is going to be a downward sloping, and it's known for both firms. So in a generic firm, the market demand is going to be something like this. P equal to A could be a number minus total quantity produced in the industry. And since we have two firms, firm 1 is producing Q1 and firm 2 is producing Q2. So capital Q is Q1 plus Q2. And if we substitute that, then this is going to be the market demand, right? The price in the market is equal to a number minus total quantity produced by the first firm minus quantity produced by the second firm. And the third assumption is that we expect both firms to have the exact same cost structure, right? So that means total cost for firm 1 is equal to total, in terms of cost structure, these two are the same, right? We are assuming these two firms have zero fixed costs, and it's only variable cost for both firms. And under variable cost, this is actually variable cost per unit, right? And since we just said that the cost structure is the same, that means the variable cost per unit for both firms is exactly the same, right? And that means the total cost for firm 1 is CQ1, and then total cost for firm 2 is CQ2, right? I need to fix it later, but there is no equity here. So, when we say cost structure is exactly the same for both firms, it means the fixed cost and the variable cost per unit should be the same. It doesn't mean total cost is necessarily equal, right? So I'm going to fix it later, but there is no equity here. It's only variable cost per unit, the same across two firms, right? So both firms would determine the quantity, which is Q1 and Q2. And each firm is deciding, assuming the other firm is making its best decision, right? So let's see how in practice each firm would make the decision. Let's start with this D1, right? Let's assume under this demand curve, second firm, so this is a decision-making process for the first term, right? So first we are going to see how the first term, or firm number 1, is going to make the decision, right? This is going to be the demand curve for firm number 1 if firm number 2 is going to produce 0. So if firm number 2 is going to produce 0, then the demand curve for firm number 1 is going to be D1, which is also the industry demand because firm 2 is producing nothing, right? If firm 2 is producing nothing, and if firm 1 faces such a demand curve, then by crossing the marginal cost of firm 1, which is equal to C, with the marginal revenue of firm 1, which is something like this, right? Then something at Q1, this Q1, it's going to be the optimum decision for firm number 1, right? This is going to be the quantity that maximizes the profit for firm 1, right? What if the second firm number 2, it's producing at some Q2, which is a positive number, anything, right? If firm 2 decides to produce something, then the demand that firm 1 faces, it's going to be lower than this one, right? Because when firm 2 is producing 0, firm 1 has the entire demand of the industry. But if firm 2 is producing something, then firm 1 would face lower demand, right? Under this demand curve, when firm 2 is producing something, then this would be the point that crosses marginal revenue and marginal cost, and this would be the optimum quantity from firm 1 that maximizes the profit of firm 1, right? So what we can see is that what would be the best decision, or what would be the optimal quantity for firm 1, that depends on how much firm 2 is producing, right? Because how much firm 2 is producing, that would change the demand curve that firm 1 faces, right? And since the demand curve changes, the quantity, the optimal quantity that maximizes firm 1 profit would also change, right? So that means the optimal quantity for firm 1 depends on how much firm 2 is producing, right? Let's go back to the whiteboard now. Now, let's graph firm 1 optimum decision against firm 2 quantity, because we just mentioned that the optimum decision of firm 1 depends how much firm 2 is going to produce, right? So we put the Q1, the optimum decision of firm 1 on the vertical line, and Q2, how much firm 2 is going to produce in the horizontal line, right? If we do so, then Q1, the optimal value for Q1, it's going to be on a line like this, right? So each point on this line is has two components, Q1 and Q2, right? So this Q1 is the optimum decision for firm 1, right? Under different values of firm 2, right? So Q2 are each value, and under each value of Q2, then Q1 is the optimum decision for firm 1, right? So each point on this line is representing the optimum value of Q1 of firm 1 under each value of firm 2, right? That means we call this line the best response function of firm 1, right? So because this is actually how much firm 1 is going to produce to maximize the profit under each value of firm 2, right? And if we put these numbers on a graph, it's going to be a line like this, right? So this is the best response function. We call it best response function of firm 1. This function is actually a downward sloping function, right? What does that mean? It means as firm 2 is producing more and more, firm 1 best response is going to be lower, right? Why is that? To answer this, we can go to the graph I just showed you. I mean, this graph, right? Look at here. As if firm 2 was producing 0, that was the demand curve for firm 1. But as Q2 is getting something positive, the demand that firm 1 faces, it's decreasing, right? So that means as firm 2 is producing something, there would be less demand left for Q1, right? So that's why this response function is a decreasing one, right? The thing is that we can do the same reasoning for firm 2 to determine the best response of firm 2. And if we do so, Then if we do the same reasoning for the second firm, then something like this, the black one, it's going to be, something like the red one, it's going to be the best response function for firm 2, right? So the black one is the one we just discussed, the best response function for firm 1. And if we do the same reasoning for firm 2, then the red one is going to be the best response function for the second firm, right? Then what would be the equilibrium of this oligopoly market under Carnot duopoly, right? The equilibrium of such a market is where best response function of the first firm crosses the best response function of the second firm, which is this point, the intersection of best response function for the first one and the second one. Right? So the point like this, Q1 star and Q2 star, that would be the equilibrium quantity produced under Carnot duopoly under oligopoly market, right? So that would be the point that each firm would produce, and each firm has no incentive to deviate from this point, right? What's going to happen if they deviate from this point? For example, if Q1 deviates from this point, producing more, right? If they go more, right? Then it's actually, it would be under the best response function of the second firm, right? So that means, for example, if the second firm is producing at Q2 star, right? Then this would be the best response function of Q1. And if Q1 is producing above this Q1 star, then that means they are not maximizing the profit, right? So this is the same thing for Q2. Under Q1, if firm 1 is producing at Q1 star, then Q2, firm 2 is going to maximize the profit, then they have to produce at Q2. If they produce more, for example, if they produce somewhere like this, they are not maximizing the profit, right? So because firm 1 is producing at Q1 star, right? So under Q1 star and Q2 stars, both firms are producing at maximum profit, right? So that's why it's the point that is the equilibrium point. Anywhere except this point, each firm has incentive to deviate, to either decrease or increase the quantity, because they are not maximizing the profit they are not, both of them, they are not maximizing the profit if we are at any point other than Q1 star and Q2 star. This point is called Nash equilibrium under game theory concept, right? So we are going to discuss the Nash equilibrium more for the next week topic, but just keep it in your mind that as long as the equilibrium point is where both players or both firms are playing at their best response, right? Then we have the Nash equilibrium function, the Nash equilibrium of the game. Now, let's compare Carnot duopoly with monopoly and perfect competition. First of all, in terms of the price, monopoly has the highest price and perfect competition has the lowest price, right? Carnot model would have a price in between, right? So the price under Carnot oligopoly, it's somewhere lower than monopoly but greater than perfect competition, right? Since the price is higher, that means the profit for the Carnot duopoly, it's going to be greater than 0, which is the economic profit of perfect competition firm, right? So the economic profit for Carnot model, it's going to be greater than 0, which is greater than perfect competition, but it's for sure lower than monopoly profit, right? So the profit and the price under Carnot is somewhere between monopoly and perfect competition.